Look closely at this photograph. A boy, no older than 10, stands beside a wooden desk. His suit is neatly pressed, his face still and blank, but his eyes, they seem to know something he should never have known. This image was taken in 1898, inside a small countryside orphanage near Derbyshire, England. The boy's name was Elias Ward, and though he left behind no family, no birth records, and almost no trace of his short life, what he did leave has baffled historians, frightened skeptics, and obsessed one man for decades. A collection of drawings that came true. But to understand those drawings, and the boy behind them, we must go back to where it all began. At St. Bartholomew's orphanage on the outskirts of Derbyshire, Elias was quiet, almost too quiet. He clutched a tin box, like it held the last piece of the world he trusted. The constable who found him said he had been standing near the ruins of a burnt house by the railway tracks, his face smudged with ash, watching the smoke rise without a word. The matron, Mrs. Holloway, described him later as a polite little ghost of a boy. He spoke little, ate less, and preferred sitting by the high windows where the fog gathered. When the others played, he drew always with broken bits of charcoal. No color, no words, just black lines on scraps of paper, precise and patient. At first, the drawings were ordinary things: the orphanage hall, the courtyard, the old oak tree bending in the wind. But soon there were details, strange ones. In one sketch, smoke drifted from the chapel roof, though there was no fire. Another showed a cart, overturned outside the bakery days before it happened. Mrs. Holloway brushed it off as coincidence, but whispers began to spread among the children. Elias draws what's about to happen, they said. Some teased him, others avoided him. Elias never fought back. When asked how he knew, he would only say softly, "I don't. I just see it." Then came the spring fever. It swept through Harrisfield like mist, creeping under every door. A coughing sickness, doctor said. A week after the first case, one of Elias's sketches showed the orphanage nursery, filled with coughing children and the matron lying weak in her chair. When the illness struck exactly as drawn, the matron locked away his papers. "He draws evil things," she muttered, her faith shaken. But Elias did not stop. He found new scraps, bits of old letters, even the backs of bills, and kept sketching in secret, by candlelight. One night, the caretaker caught him awake, hands black with soot. "What are you drawing now, boy?" he asked. Elias didn't look up. "Just faces," he said. The caretaker saw the page. Faces of people in town, but their eyes were closed. Every one of them. A few weeks later, one of those same men died in an accident at the mill. The rest began avoiding the orphanage altogether. They said the boy saw death before it came, with kind eyes and a manner that carried both curiosity and fatigue. He had served in London hospitals, treating men broken by the city's endless grind, and had returned home for rest, though he never seemed at rest. He visited St. Bartholomew's under the guise of examining the children after the fever, but he had already heard the rumors. He watched Elias from a distance, how the boy drew, how his gaze often drifted toward nothing, as if listening to something too faint for others. Hale tried to speak with him once. "You draw what you see, Elias?" The boy looked up and nodded. "Sometimes before I see it." The doctor asked to see his sketches, but Mrs. Holloway refused. "No good comes from those," she said. "He'll forget soon enough." But Elias didn't forget. His drawings grew darker, Dutch streets with shuttered windows, empty churches, soldiers marching past homes. That looked too familiar to be imagination. No one knew how he had seen such things, yet when newspapers arrived weeks later reporting riots and unrest in the nearby industrial towns, Hale began to wonder if coincidence had limits. He came more often after that, sometimes with medicine, sometimes with questions. The boy began to trust him, at least enough to let him sit quietly nearby while he drew. But even then, Elias never allowed anyone to touch his papers. Then, one grey morning in 1898, Mrs. Holloway went to wake the children and found Elias still in bed. His eyes closed, lips faintly curved, as if he had fallen asleep smiling. But he did not wake. There were no signs of illness, no struggle, no reason. The doctor examined him carefully, his face unreadable. "Perhaps his heart," he whispered, but even he didn't sound convinced. The matron said a small prayer, buried the boy behind the chapel, and told the staff to burn everything he had drawn. But that night, when everyone was asleep, Dr. Hale returned. He opened the drawer in the matron's office and took every sheet, every torn scrap, every charcoal-stained paper, and placed them carefully into his leather bag. No one saw him leave. He locked the sketches in his study, far from curious eyes. For weeks he told himself it was for research, to understand, to find reason. But when the first of the boy's drawn events began to happen again, exactly as they appeared, he locked the papers away once more. Years passed, he never spoke of Elias again. But time has a strange way of whispering back, and one day, long after he thought he had buried both curiosity and fear, the doctor found himself staring again at that same leather bag in his cabinet, covered in dust, yet almost waiting for him. The year was 1901. England was changing, factories rising like iron giants, the countryside thinning under smoke and steel. Yet inside a modest stone house, on the edge of Derbyshire, time seemed to have stopped. Dr. Arthur Hale sat alone in his study, the shutters drawn against the afternoon light. The air was heavy with the smell of dust, ink, and something faintly metallic, the forgotten scent of old charcoal. The leather bag lay on his desk. For years it had remained untouched, sealed away like a locked memory. But that morning, as he was sorting through old journals, Hale's eyes caught its cracked handle. The mere sight of it stirred something deep. Not fear, not yet, but the uneasy hum of curiosity long denied. He opened it. Inside were the sketches, each folded with childlike care. The edges had browned, and a faint texture of soot still clung to them. He spread the first few across the table. The chapel, the courtyard, the oak tree, places he knew well. And then, deeper in the pile, he found what he had tried hardest to forget. A drawing of the orphanage roof, black smoke curling from the shingles. The date at the corner read March 1898, drawn weeks before the fire. That destroyed part of the east wing. Hale had tended to the burns himself. He leaned back, staring at it. Coincidence, he muttered aloud, though the word felt fragile. He turned to another, a crowded street, a banner reading, "Long live the workers." Men and women, fists raised, standing before a building that looked unmistakably like the textile factory in Derby. The newspaper clippings on his shelf confirmed it. The Derby strike, 1899. Elias had never left the orphanage grounds. Hale rubbed his temple. How could a boy of 10 know such things? He studied the next page, tracing the black lines with careful fingers. Amid the chaos of the crowd stood a small figure, faint, smaller than the rest, always at the edge of the scene. A figure with no face, only shadow. Hale frowned. He had seen it before in another sketch. He shuffled through more pages. It appeared again and again, always watching. "Was that you, Elias?" he whispered. The question meant for no one. He sat back, uneasy. Perhaps the boy had drawn himself, as a silent witness or maybe as a way of remembering. But the placement was too precise, always near where the event began. In the weeks that followed, Hale's quiet home became a chamber of papers and questions. By candlelight, he laid out the sketches across the floor, matching them with events from the newspapers. The flood in Leeds, the mine collapse in Cornwall, the fever outbreak in Bristol. Each image was eerily accurate, from the tilt of a church spire to the posture of the men digging graves. But there were others he could not place. One sketch showed a train, halted on the tracks, its passengers crowded around a broken bridge. Another displayed a factory bell tower, collapsing into the street. Each corner bore a faint mark, a number perhaps, or a date. But the handwriting was too faint to read. Hale began keeping a journal. "If these are not predictions," he wrote, "then they are reflections of events unseen, imprinted somehow upon the boy's mind. Yet the precision, it defies sense." By the second month, his obsession grew. He traveled to towns mentioned in the old papers, asking quiet questions about the dates and accidents. Some dismissed him as a curious academic. Others grew nervous when he mentioned the sketches. "Best let the past alone, Doctor," one man warned. "That boy's name is still whispered here, and not kindly." When he returned home, he noticed something he hadn't before. In one of the sketches, the one showing the orphanage hall, a tall figure stood near the window, watching the children play. It wasn't Elias. The face was blurred, but the posture was familiar, shoulders slightly hunched, one hand in the coat pocket. Hale leaned closer, and a faint chill passed over him. He sat back quickly, laughing under his breath. "Imagination," he said, "just imagination." Still, the image stayed with him. That night, he dreamt of the orphanage corridors, the smell of chalk and wet wood, the faint echo of children's footsteps. He dreamt of Elias, sitting by the window, his small hand dragging a piece of charcoal across the paper. When Hale stepped closer in the dream, the boy turned and looked up at him. "You shouldn't have opened them," he said softly. The doctor woke, drenched in sweat. Days turned into weeks. Each evening he found himself drawn back to the sketches. He had mapped nearly 20 now, all connecting somehow to real events between 1896 and 1900, the last one he deciphered. That spring showed something new. A crowd gathered near a harbour, smoke billowing in the distance. On the far edge of the drawing stood the same faceless figure, arms slightly raised, as if pointing toward the water. 3 weeks later, news came from London. A dock explosion, dozens dead. Hale sat staring at the newspaper headline until the ink blurred. He opened his notebook and wrote just one line. He drew it again. But this time, something inside him shifted. It was no longer fear. It was fascination. The precision of these drawings, the timing, the detail, could not be ignored. What if Elias had not foreseen the future, but merely sensed it, the way one feels thunder before it strikes? Could such perception be measured, studied? He began to write letters to old colleagues in London, to scholars interested in psychological phenomena. None replied. Most considered such ideas beneath scientific inquiry. And so, Hale continued alone. By autumn, he noticed another pattern. Each drawing bore faint initials in the lower corners, small, nearly invisible, his own. He stared at them for a long time before realizing what they were. Not letters, but shadows. Shadows of his own name, written by the charcoal's pressure against another page beneath it. He laughed again, a short, uneasy sound, coincidence upon coincidence. That evening, as rain tapped against the glass, he gathered all the sketches and placed them into a folder. His study smelled of damp paper and extinguished candlelight. He looked once more at the faint figure in the crowd scenes, the boy, or perhaps something else, and shook his head. "Elias Ward," he murmured. "Whatever you saw, it ended with you." But the words felt hollow, because somewhere deep down the doctor knew the sketches had not ended at all. They were still unfolding one by one. Winter settled harshly over Derbyshire that year. The frost came early, glazing the windows of Dr. Hale's house with thin veins of white, as if the cold itself sought entry. Inside, the doctor's study was dim and silent, save for the faint rustle of papers, the sketches now carefully arranged across the floor, like a map of some collapsing world. Each image seemed to breathe in the candlelight, the charcoal deepening to shadow. Hale's journal had grown thick, with notes and diagrams, angles of perspective, handwriting analyses, even calculations of lunar phases against the drawing's dates. Yet, despite his efforts, one truth pressed heavier. With each passing day, the sketches were no longer aligning with the past. They were pointing forward. The first new drawing appeared one morning among his notes. He did not remember placing it there. It showed a narrow street, rain-slicked, with gas lamps bending under the wind. A procession of people in dark coats walked toward a church. Above the doorway, faintly drawn, was the word Derbyshire. Hale turned it over, blank. No date. 2 weeks later, the church bell collapsed during a storm. The newspapers called it an act of God. Hale called it something else. He began marking the drawings on his wall, connecting them with strings of red twine, floods, fires, strikes, collapses, a pattern of decay circling outward. From the orphanage itself, as if the world Elias had drawn was spreading. By February, Hale had stopped sleeping. He heard the faint scratching of charcoal at night, from his desk, or perhaps inside the walls. Sometimes he found new sketches he couldn't recall making. Cities half sunken, skies thick with ash, faceless crowds staring toward horizons where the sun was black. His handwriting filled the margins, words he didn't remember writing. The world is ending. The way the boy saw it, in silence first, then smoke. He wrote to no one now. His colleagues' replies had long ceased. To the locals, he was a recluse, haunted by guilt. They whispered that he spoke to a child who wasn't there. They were not entirely wrong. Hale had begun talking to Elias, not lied, not aloud, but through the drawings. Questions written on one sheet appeared answered in the next. The world is ending. The way the boy saw it, in silence first, then smoke. He wrote to no one now. His colleagues' replies had long ceased. To the locals, he was a recluse, haunted by guilt. They whispered that he spoke to a child who wasn't there. They were not entirely wrong. Hale had begun talking to Elias, or not aloud, but through the drawings. Questions written on one sheet appeared answered in the next. "Why these?" he scrawled once. The next day, a sketch arrived, a crumbling globe held in a child's hands. By spring, he took the sketches to the moors, believing distance might quiet them. But even there, the wind carried the same sound, faint strokes against paper. When he looked toward the horizon, the sky seemed bruised, the color of dying embers. The final entry in his journal, dated April 12, 1902, reads, "I see now what he meant. The drawings are not warnings. They are memory, the memory of what the world once was, drawn again before it disappears." Elias did not predict destruction, he preserved it. Weeks later, neighbors reported smoke rising from Hale's home. When the constable entered, he found the study burned to black, the walls charred with outlines of drawings, fused into the plaster, cities, oceans, and a figure of a boy, holding a lantern before a vast, crumbling world. The folder of sketches was never recovered, but in the ruins, they found one page untouched by flame, a simple landscape drawn in soft charcoal. At its center stood a small house, under a pale sky. In the window, a man sat at a desk, drawing. The fire did not destroy everything. Much of Dr. Hale's study remained intact, though the villagers whispered it should have burned completely, for the smell of smoke clung to the walls. Long after the ashes cooled, weeks later Hale returned, alive but altered. He claimed the fire began when a lamp toppled, though his neighbors noticed his hands bore no burns. He moved quietly through the streets, buying candles and blank paper in bulk. Inside his home, the air grew dense with charcoal and oil. He no longer practiced medicine. His letters to colleagues turned into fragments. Patterns recur, perception beyond reason. Elias still speaks. Those who read them thought him unwell. But to Hale, something had shifted. After the fire, the sketches had changed. The drawings now came faster. Sometimes he would leave his desk for a moment and return to find new sheets, resting atop his notes, scenes he didn't remember drawing, yet his own handwriting filled their margins. One morning, he found a depiction of a railway bridge over the River Derwent, crowded with onlookers, and beside it a note, 5 days. He tore it down, shaking. Yet on the 5th day, a newspaper boy shouted through the street, "Bridge collapse near Matlock, 20 lost." Hale's hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. The image was identical, even the figures' positions identical. He began testing the timings. Each new sketch bore faint numerals scrawled in the corners, intervals perhaps between the drawing and the event. He mapped them, searching for order. Some matched exactly, others did not. But all, in time, came true, and the faceless figure was always there. Hale tried to rationalize it, he told himself. It was Elias's way of anchoring the scenes. The boy's self-portrait repeated through the years. But the figure's stance had changed. It no longer looked like a child. Its shoulders were broader now, its height taller, the head bowed as if in study. Hale stared at it one evening and whispered, "Who are you becoming?" The house grew oppressive. He kept every lamp burning, fearing the dark corners. Where the sketches leaned against the walls, visitors stopped coming. Even the postman refused to step beyond the gate, after finding pages strewn along the path, soaked from dew, showing things that hadn't happened yet. Then came the drawing of the moor, a sweeping landscape under a slate sky. A lone carriage overturned on the hillside. The driver's hat lay beside the wheel. At the bottom, faint words, "Return to where he began." That night, Hale rode out to the orphanage ruins. The ground was uneven, the stones moss-covered, but he found the oak tree still standing, the same one from the boy's earliest sketch. Beneath it, half buried in the dirt, he unearthed a rusted tin box containing several rolled drawings sealed with wax. They were dated 1897 to 1898. He brought them home, his pulse quickening. When unrolled, they revealed scenes eerily familiar, the same disasters but drawn from a higher vantage, as if the artist had been standing above the world, looking down, and in each the faceless figure stood in shadow near a window, always watching. For hours, Hale studied the lines. The strokes were finer than Elias's, more deliberate. It was as if someone had redrawn them, preserved them. But by whom? And why in his hand did they tremble with such recognition? That week he began sketching again. Consciously this time, he wanted to prove control, that his mind, not something unseen, guided the charcoal. Yet, when he finished a drawing of his own study, he froze. There, in the reflection of the window pane he had just drawn, stood the same shadowed figure, posture identical to his own. He stepped back. The room behind him was empty. In his final entries that month, his writing faltered. The drawings replicate themselves. Each scene births another. I think now the boy was not recording events, but handing them forward to me. I am only the next observer, preserving what was given, but what happens. When the observer becomes the subject, the last dated page read simply, "Elias did not vanish. He passed the vision on." And beneath it, faintly smudged by his trembling thumb, was a sketch, a small figure seated at a desk, Beneath a pale window, charcoal poised in hand, as though waiting for something unseen. To finish the line he had started. For months Dr. Hale lived in near silence. The lamps in his study burned through the night, casting trembling light. Across stacks of yellowed sketches, he had catalogued each drawing, pinned, labelled and dated. Tracing the intervals between art and reality, the pattern was there, precise as clockwork. Every drawn calamity arrived. After its appointed number of days, then one evening in early autumn, while sorting through the tin box, once buried beneath the orphanage oak, he discovered a smaller bundle of sealed sheets. The wax was cracked, the paper brittle. Within were scenes grander than before. Fires in distant cities, a ship foundering off a rocky coast, processions of mourners beneath gaslit streets. Each carried numbers, scrawled faintly beside them, 17, 22, 36, but it was the last sheet that made him pause. The charcoal lines were darker, heavier, almost violent. The faceless figure was there again, this time lying motionless upon a chair, one hand clutching its chest. Around the figure stood shelves of books, scattered candles, and a narrow desk. His own study. Hale stared for hours, his lips trembling. "Elias," he whispered, "why this? You've been gone for years." He convinced himself it must be symbolic, a metaphor for loss perhaps, or an echo of the boy's fading memory. Still, he began to watch the streets outside his window, listening for carriages, for the tolling of church bells, for news. Days passed, then weeks. Each morning he drew a mark upon the wall, counting toward the number, inked faintly in the sketch's corner, 12. On the 10th day he grew restless, pacing. By the 11th sleep abandoned him. The 12th dawned grey and still. He sat before the last drawing once more, tracing the faint outline of the fallen figure. Something shifted within him, a realization blooming too late. The height, the chair, the tilt of the head, all were his own. "It isn't the boy," he whispered. "It never was." The charcoal slipped from his hand, pain bloomed in his chest, sudden, deep, unrelenting. The lamplight flickered, papers rose and fluttered like frightened birds. As the darkness closed in, understanding came in one final flash. The man in the last sketch was not Elias, nor a stranger. It was him. And the faceless figure haunting every drawing, the silent observer watching tragedy unfold, had never been the boy at all. It had always been the doctor.